How you guys all doing? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, coming to you live today on June 13th, coming towards the end of the week, but still another round of great NFL stories to talk about on today's episode. We're going to start off with the biggest topic, in my opinion, Aaron Rodgers missing the entirety of the Jets' mandatory minicamp. Why that is and my thoughts on it are coming up in just a few seconds. Also, the NFL finally announced the tampering situation punishments handed out to the Atlanta Falcons and the Philadelphia Eagles. Stay tuned to find out what those were. And also later on, we're going to talk about Travis Kelce and him talking about his future. After extending with the Kansas City Chiefs, what does his future look like? Potentially a soon-to-be retirement coming towards the horizon of his career. Stick around to know more about those topics and a lot more on today's show. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And also, if you have any question or comment you want to make on today's episode, please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that, I'll be able to see your question and read it on air, and that way, get a feel for what you guys are thinking and your guys' perspective on anything I say or on any of the topics on hand. It's a massive help for this show and also the network, so please, if you guys could, use the tip and donations link again, GSMCPodcast.net. But, but now moving on to the first topic, like I mentioned, we have Aaron Rodgers and his absence from mandatory minicamp. It was revealed, or Robert Saleh, I should say, revealed it to everybody. He let everyone know that Rodgers' absence on Tuesday was for an unexcused reasoning there, but people thought it was only going to be just for Tuesday. Robert Saleh went up there and sort of clarified why Aaron Rodgers wasn't there. Then The Athletic reported, and they revealed that Aaron Rodgers was actually going to be out for the entirety of this week of the mandatory minicamp period for the New York Jets. And Robert Saleh sort of alluded to this back on Tuesday. A lot of people might not have picked up on it, but in his comments on Tuesday, Robert Saleh said that he hinted at this possibility when he mentioned Tyrod Taylor. And from the practice on Tuesday, he said that Tyrod might have the opportunity to run the 2-minute offense today, meaning Tuesday, and also tomorrow, yesterday on Wednesday. So there was those comments, and also Robert Saleh mentioning how the reason why Aaron Rodgers wasn't there was because of a previously scheduled event that was, in quotes, important to him, according to Robert Saleh. And of course, the fines for an unexcused absence from mandatory minicamp will total up to over $100,000 for Aaron Rodgers. Not that that's the biggest issue that I have with it, or not the biggest issue overall with this situation, but it's just, one, it was very unexpected, obviously. No one leading up to this point would have thought that Aaron Rodgers had any conflict or any sort of situation with being at mandatory minicamp, but also because he has shown up for the voluntary portion of it, he didn't have to be there for OTAs or the other stuff beforehand, but he seemed to be doing a lot more, going above and beyond, and being there because he missed all of last season. So you would think he needs that extra time, get accustomed to everybody, get everything back in the flow, especially coming off of an Achilles injury. You need that extra time, I would think, to really feel 100%. Even with all the experience that Aaron Rodgers has, I think that was still important. And that's sort of where my issues come about with all of this, because one, when Robert Saleh mentioned this on Tuesday, when it first came out to everybody, he said he didn't specify what the event was. He just said it was something that was important to Aaron Rodgers, so it was an unexcused absence still, and that already sounds a little fishy, right? Because if you're going to excuse him and sort of allow him to do something like this, you would think you would at least excuse it and understand that this is something worth missing mandatory minicamp about. But because it was still unexcused and he didn't really reveal anything as to why, that already seemed a bit fishy to me. If Robert Saleh really didn't know, or if he did know and just didn't want to say because it would paint Aaron Rodgers in a bad picture, that already is a negative sort of feeling around that, this whole situation with Rodgers not being there. And then you move on. I hear other reports from other sources around it. I think Colin Cowherd said it on his show that Rodgers had a previously scheduled vacation or just a trip, maybe not a vacation, but just something else planned away, maybe from the United States or from New York. I don't know the specifics of it, but I heard Colin Cowherd say that on his show, and if that is to be the case, one, obviously scheduling it ahead of time, like I assume he did, this vacation, planning it ahead of time, you would think, you would see that it would clash with mandatory minicamps. So I don't know. Maybe you still plan it on that, or you really did forget. And once the moment comes, I would probably feel like you would choose to stay for mandatory minicamp. Again, I do know that this is Aaron Rodgers we're talking about. He doesn't necessarily need these extra reps and extra work to put in for himself, but I'll come back to that in just a second. But at the end of the day, looking at these two situations, if you have double booked this or if you do have these overlapping events, one, I would probably think that maybe you would choose mandatory minicamp, like I said before, and then maybe your trip, depending on what it is, we don't know. And that's really none of our business to know what this other event is. But again, if it's an unexcused absence and you communicated it with Robert Saleh like he made it seem, that Rodgers and him had a dialogue to maybe specify what this event was. If it was important and Robert Saleh, didn't make a big deal about it, you could review it and then make it an excused absence. If Robert Saleh is hiding it, then that also isn't a positive thing for this entire situation. If Saleh doesn't want to reveal what this event is, maybe because it really isn't worth missing mandatory minicamp for that reason. But again, we don't know the specifics of that. That's Aaron Rodgers' business. But where I think most people, and I still have a bit of a problem with this, is that it now ineffectively or just symbiotically is the word I'm looking for, affects everybody else, and I'll explain why, is because, like I mentioned before, maybe Rodgers doesn't need these extra reps, maybe he doesn't necessarily need to learn the playbook a little bit more, or because he was there at the voluntary portion, he could sort of, it could be okay for him to miss this mandatory part, right? But in saying that, it's not just all about him. Of course he makes everything go, he is a crucial piece to everything, but because he's not there, of course, maybe it doesn't affect him, but it affects everybody around him. And that, I think, is the bigger picture. And the biggest issue I have with this, because with Rodgers not being there, okay, maybe you don't have to be, but then everybody else now, the receivers have to get throws by a different quarterback. Now the offensive line has to protect somebody else who doesn't have the same movement as you. And the defense has to play against somebody else, maybe not at the quality of that level. So maybe they could be a little bit easier for them. I don't know. But that's one thing. And then on the other hand, outside of football and how it is perceived by everybody else, it makes it seem almost like, and I'm not unaware of the fact that Aaron Rodgers will probably realistically get different treatment than the second string receiver, than the second string defensive back, and even the starting running back and Breece Hall or maybe Garrett Wilson. Aaron Rodgers will obviously and realistically get a better treatment than those guys, even if nobody wants to admit it. That's the reality of it all. That in mind, it sort of paints Rodgers out in a very weird negative light, just because you're getting an unexcused absence, one, so it doesn't mean it's okay, but you're still doing it anyway. Sort of paints the picture that he is almost above what these rules and regulations are for the New York Jets and all these other players. And if other players see Rodgers doing this, and the message is, like it is with most teams, everybody's treated equally, then it almost paints the picture that these rules aren't really set in stone and they can be bypassed by almost anybody. If it doesn't apply to Aaron Rodgers, you don't want to make it seem like he's above everybody else, then it implies to everybody, and it doesn't make the rules or these regulations that run the New York Jets organization that solidified, and that paints the organization in a bad picture. And again, it just sets a bad example to go along with that last point. And at the end of the day also, it just creates an outside of football storyline that, again, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have to care about, quite honestly. He doesn't have to worry about or fear it, for a lack of a better terms, that he is creating outside noise, but he can't create that or just not be aware of the fact that this is going to be a headline from now probably until training camp, and still come in and think like nothing really is happening, that it wasn't such a big deal, because this is also Aaron Rodgers, who said a few months back, or really at the start of the offseason, towards really the end of last season, that in quotes, he said, "The BS that has nothing to do with winning needs to get out of this building." He said that back towards the end of last season, and you can't say that and then have a situation like this pop up where it almost seems like it was just very unorthodox, unexpected, that, hey, I'm not, you popped in and said, "I'm not going to be here this week. Sorry, I had something else planned." It almost seems, and it's painted out to be like that. And that is just it's just hypocritical when people see that quote and then you're doing something like this. It doesn't paint a good picture for Aaron Rodgers and this New York Jets team. And again, it just creates more outside noise that this team definitely doesn't need. They don't need extra motivation to have the media create outside stories about them. The media can do it all, can do it pretty well on their own, but now Aaron Rodgers is giving them more of a reason to do that. And when he comes back, I doubt he really answers the question when they ask him, but also now with this, he has to answer to that, focus on stuff outside of football, and it's not really a great look to end mandatory minicamp, where they have such good and exciting pieces and storylines to talk about, like Malachi Corley stepping up, the offensive line hopefully getting better and more healthy as this mandatory period goes on, the defense getting another year of experience, how good are they performing, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson becoming even more of an elite talent than they already were. But it's all superseded by Aaron Rodgers, and everybody talking about now, where's Aaron Rodgers? Why isn't he there? Why are the Jets allowing this? Is this going to be a distraction all year? How good is the chemistry going to be when they reach training camp and into the regular season? All of that now jumps to the top of the headline instead of all the other positive things that could come from the Jets. And it's a shame that, that it is happening. I don't want to believe that Rodgers is selfish or anything like that, but I think he just should have been more aware of what the negatives could be with this, and scheduling this event, vacation, whatever it may be, with mandatory minicamp on the same date. If it came down to choosing one, I probably would have chosen mandatory minicamp, knowing all the other factors that could come along with it. But Aaron Rodgers has been doing this for a while. He is sort of a master of trolling the media now and having fun with it. So I'm looking forward to see what he answers when he comes back, or the next time somebody asks him about it. But for now, we will take a break from this segment and leave it there. We're going to head to our first break of the show, and when we return, we're going to talk about the NFL finally coming down with a punishment to the Atlanta Falcons and not the Philadelphia Eagles for the tampering allegations that happened towards the start of free agency. I'll inform you guys on what that punishment was and why the Philadelphia Eagles did not receive a punishment along with the Atlanta Falcons. That is coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere.